I want to be involved in everything. For me, I think that's one of the biggest strengths I have as a coach is managing the whole thing, being involved in special teams, being involved in the offense, the defensive sides, being involved with coaches. The big thing is making sure everybody is on the same page. Demand excellence out of everybody and make sure you get that. If you don't, you've got to make a change. That's what being a head coach is about. Those are the hard, tough decisions you've got to make, and that's what I'm ready to do. That was Kirby Smart on December, what was that, the 2nd? 7th. That was Kirby Smart December 7th, 2015. The day he was announced as head coach at Georgia. And from that time forward, he's done something that nobody else in college football history has done. He's won more games. He's won more games than anybody else. That's when you look at what Kirby Smart's done, the most wins by a head coach in his first 8 seasons of college football. Nick Saban didn't do that. I mean, we're talking about arguably the greatest. I mean, I don't know how much argument there's got to be about Nick being the best head coach of all time in college football, but I'll use the term arguably. Nick didn't do that. Bear Bryant didn't do that. Those are the only. I mean, Spurrier. I don't know who else would be 3 in the grand scheme of things. Urban. Talk about Urban. None of them have as many wins as Kirby's got, and he's racking them up. He's racking them up, man. I mean, when you start thinking about in 8 years winning 90 plus games, I mean that's a lot. That's a lot of football games. Now, what will happen here? 94 and 16. What will happen here is that the Alabama folks will get fully triggered because they've got antennas for ears, and whenever you say Nick Saban, that really piques their interest. But look, Nick's first however many years were not in the spotlight, and so he got to develop behind the scenes in a way. I mean, I don't know that that's the best way to put it, but even while he was at Michigan State, there was not a lot of attention. I remember when Michigan State beat Florida in '99 or 2000, one of the two. And I was like, man, Florida lost to Michigan State. How did that happen? Nick Saban's how that happened. He just straight up out coached Steve Spurrier. He's a better coach than Steve Spurrier. He proved that many times. But I think we have to step back and say, well, how did we get here? It took some, the first 18 months were, I would say, challenging. I mean, Georgia didn't practice on its practice fields for the first year. Sometimes when I talk about these things, it reminds me of conversations I had with people at the time. And I remember in 16 talking to, oh my gosh, a lot of former players, some who played with Kirby, some who had just played, some who, maybe didn't just play, but they were in the league at the time or whatever, and not one of them had doubt about this. Is this going to work or not? Oh, for sure. I remember one person who's still a prominent voice said to me, "Oh yeah, it's going to work. It's not going to work with the offensive line they've got right now. That's definitely not what they're trying to do. They can't do it with what they've got." And then they went out and got what they needed, which was an offensive line that matched the mauling nature of what sort of Sam Pittman and company wanted to do. They wouldn't have been able to pull that off without that 17 class. And, I mean, it helped to get Andrew Thomas. I'll tell you that right now. That was a very good start. But, I had Andrew, Isaiah Wilson, who didn't play that year. But, I mean, that first class had Richard LeCount, Andrew Thomas, DeAndre Swift, Jake Fromm. These are guys that played right away. I mean, if you go back and look against Notre Dame, the last offensive snap that wasn't taking knees, on the field, there were like 3 or 4. It might have been 4 true freshmen, but I know it was Andrew Thomas, Jake Fromm, Swift. I'm trying to remember. I feel like there was one other true freshman. It might have been or freshman that was out there, but there were a lot of young guys, and they had. If they don't get Andrew Thomas, he just helped set so much. So, Kirby was not exaggerating when he had that line. I'm going to be involved in everything. Yeah, no kidding. And talking with people who were in the program in 16 and 17, it depends on who you talk to. If you'd ask, some people did not feel like he micromanaged at all. They felt like, hey, he set the pace, and they took it from there. And it was probably, I know people who worked the first year and then they didn't. It just wasn't a fit. And I'm not talking about coaches necessarily. I'm talking about people sort of inside the program. But Georgia had to grow too. Georgia's expectations needed to grow. Georgia's aspirations, I guess. I know Georgia pretty well. I would say I know it as well, if not as well or better than anybody. And I'm not saying that to brag. That's not the point. I'm saying that for context. And Georgia just was not, in terms of as an institution, in my opinion, where it needed to be mentally. And it was going mentally to put things into place in order to have success. They needed, so a lot of stuff led to Mark Richt being let go, the vast majority of it on the field. But there wasn't a push from Mark, unfortunately, for sort of demanding things that Kirby demanded. And I think that Mark, maybe he lost the clout that he had. That's very possible. Mark could maybe say, Mark Richt, or boosters could say better behind the scenes. But he didn't demand that they have indoor. When you compare the indoor trash that Damon Evans put at Georgia compared to what is at Georgia now, that's that's the other problem for Mark. He went from Vince Dooley to Damon Evans, and that was not a good time. And that was not a good time at all. And by the time that Damon was gone, Georgia was trying to get back up off the ground from what was a really embarrassing scandal. And football had not been good for 2 years, and that's not Damon's fault exclusively. But the support wasn't there. I'm just going to tell you that straight up. The support was not there, and from an institutional level. I think Greg got there and said, "What do you need? We're going to give you what you need. You need to ask for what you need." But the ask didn't always match what the expectations to win a national championship were, from my perspective. And the athletic director, the president, they can't know what, this is the wrong way to put it, but they don't know what cleats you need to be wearing. Okay. So you need to say forcefully, this is what I need. I have to have this to compete. That connection was not there. Enter Kirby, the connection made. And so I hear people a lot want to run Greg McGarity down for whatever reason, and that's fine. Do it in the comments, but that's way overblown. That's way overblown. And Greg's mistake at Georgia was not firing Mark Fox earlier. And I've had this conversation with Greg McGarity. I don't know if I had it with Greg. I've told Greg that, but that has been for 10 years. This is well before Mark Fox was fired. That was Greg's mistake. But nonetheless, I digress. When Kirby came in, everything pointed the same direction now for the first time in a while at Georgia. There was too much. There was not a emphasis on winning in a way that needed to happen underneath the surface. So this giant staff that you saw at Alabama, Georgia was figuring out how Alabama was doing that. Well, 2 years into Kirby, they weren't asking questions anymore. They were just doing it. they weren't asking about why do you need this giant recruiting budget. They just did it. They got out of the way. And, frankly, that's a style too. That's a management style as well. If you have a person who's a particular expert in their field, you get out of the way. What Kirby did that led to long-term success was not only was he doing the little stuff all the time right, which was recruiting, development. He got Nick and Sony and everybody to come back, and that right there, that made it a lot easier to go play for a national championship, considering everything that happened bad at Georgia in 2017. You had, I guess 2017 is correct. You lost your starting quarterback in the first game of the season. People forget that part. That was huge. You had to survive a road game against Notre Dame. You got, I don't know how else to say other than you got blown out at Auburn. All of those things, they survived all of them, and in some instances they thrived because of them. I mean, there's plenty of people that think that Jacob Eason doesn't lead Georgia to the national championship game, that you only get that with Jake Fromm. I don't know about that. I mean, I don't know. We can't prove the negative, but there's an explanation as to why Georgia's won 94 games. It is a relentless pursuit of winning that their head coach is on the path of, A, and then B, that the school finally, I think, understood the power of what winning like that could be. The people who Greg McGarity was at Georgia during the Herschel years, I think Jerry Moorhead actually was there too, although I couldn't say for sure. But they were both young. They were both in their 30s probably at the time. And this is a different monster now. College football is not like it was in the 80s. College football is not like it was in the 2000s, okay? Nevertheless, the 80s. So it's a different world. It's a national sport. It's not a regional sport. There's not what's going to happen against Georgia Tech. No, they want to know if you're winning the national championship or not. They want to know if you're in the playoff. They want to know, what was it like when you played Tennessee? Georgia never played Tennessee in the 80s. They played them like 4 times in the 80s, I think. 80, 81, 88. And 89 maybe. I mean, they hardly played Tennessee. That was, stuff like that. They played South Carolina every year, but it wasn't a conference game. I mean, everything has changed, and everything continues to change. It's part of the sport. But I think they saw what had happened at Alabama. They saw what had happened at Clemson. I mean, Clemson's not even an hour and 15 minutes from Athens, and I think there was what in the world are we doing wrong? And they fixed it. And now you see Kirby Smart, 94 wins, 2 national championships, 2 SECs, a bunch of bowl wins later. The success is here. Now the question is, how much bigger can this get? And I would not put a ceiling